It started with a whisper, an idea that crawled into my brain late one night as I sat in my penthouse, staring out over a city that I helped build. I was surrounded by everything: wealth, power, prestige. Yet all I could feel was nothing. I'd spent years engineering success, but somewhere along the way, I forgot what people looked like when they weren't pitching, begging, or bowing. So I did something unthinkable. I vanished. I erased Mark Langston, billionaire investor and CEO of 3 global corporations, from the face of the earth. And in his place, I became someone else. Someone no one would notice. Someone no one would help. I became a nobody. The plan was simple. For 30 days, I'd live as a homeless man. No money, no contacts, no safety nets. A full immersion to see how society treated the people it pretended not to see. I wanted answers. What does compassion look like when it's inconvenient? Who shows kindness when there's no reward? But I didn't realize the truth wasn't just hidden in the shadows. It lived there. And once I stepped into that world, it started watching me back. I named him James. That was my new identity. No last name, no ID, just a thrift store hoodie, jeans too big for my waist, and shoes that stank of someone else's life. I shaved my beard, added scars with makeup, even wore contact lenses to dull the brightness of my eyes. I looked like a man life had already forgotten. I picked the east side of the city, the part where gentrification had paused just long enough to let misery rot between boarded windows and cracked sidewalks. It smelled like wet cardboard in desperation. A perfect setting. The first day, I just walked. I carried a backpack with one change of clothes, a journal, and a disposable phone with GPS disabled. No cash. I made sure of that. I wanted this to be as real as possible. I even hired a former military survivalist to train me 2 weeks beforehand, just enough to keep myself alive, but not enough to cheat suffering. By nightfall, I found a spot beneath an overpass. My bed was a flattened cereal box, my pillow a bundled hoodie. The concrete sucked the heat from my bones. Every passing car felt like it would never stop. But what scared me most wasn't the cold or the hunger. It was the silence. People walked by. Couples, joggers, late-night workers. Not one made eye contact. Not one offered a glance. I wasn't invisible. I was inconvenient. By day 3, I was starving. I waited outside a bakery for 4 hours, pretending not to exist. A young woman came out holding a bag of fresh bread. I made eye contact, smiled. She clutched her purse tighter and crossed the street. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it stung in ways I hadn't expected. I had created this game, these rules, and I was already losing. It was that afternoon I met Angela. She worked at the community food pantry. Mid-30s, wore her hair in a mess of bun, and walked like she had no time for nonsense. She didn't ask where I came from, didn't ask what I needed, just handed me a paper plate with beans, rice, and 2 slices of bread. And then she looked at me. "Sit near the back," she said. "Some of these guys bite." There was a small kindness in her tone, sharp but not cruel, like she had built her own armor to survive this world and was willing to lend me a piece just for a moment. Later, I'd learned she'd been homeless once herself. Later, I'd learned far worse. By the end of the first week, I had learned the rhythm of the streets, where to find water, which dumpsters held day-old pastries, what neighborhoods you never wandered through alone. I journaled every interaction, who helped, who ignored, who threatened me just for existing. But something odd started happening. I'd find things in my pack that I hadn't placed there. Once it was a protein bar. Another time, a tiny photo, me as a boy, maybe 8 years old, standing in front of my childhood house. That picture should have been locked away. I didn't tell anyone my real name. I never went near my old life. So how did someone find that? Paranoia crept in like fog. I started scanning crowds. Faces blurred. One man with a hood always stood across the street around midnight. Never moved, just watched. I told myself it was my mind playing tricks. Until I saw the symbol. It was etched into the wood beside the bench I'd been sleeping on, a circle with an X through it. Crude, but intentional. I didn't think much of it until I saw the same mark behind the pantry where Angela worked. Then on a trash can in an alley I passed daily. Someone was leaving a trail. But for who? For me? I began to change. Not just the way I looked, but who I was inside. There's a certain madness that comes when you go days without hearing your name, without being touched, without being seen. It strips you bare. You start questioning everything. Was I still pretending? Or had the performance become real? I caught myself crying once, curled behind a dumpster, clutching my stomach. It wasn't from hunger. It was from grief. For the world I'd never understood. For the people I'd judged. For the man I was and wasn't anymore. And then Angela did something that shattered me. She gave me a job, sweeping floors in the pantry basement. $2 an hour, under the table, no questions asked. Everyone deserves a second start, she said. That night, I stared at my reflection in a cracked mirror, and I hated what I saw. Because for the first time in my life, I realized I had never earned anything. Not really, but just when I thought I was settling into something real. Everything unraveled. I found a note in my shoe. Handwritten. No name. You're not the only one pretending. My heart stopped. I looked around. The alley was empty. The street quiet. But the note smelled like my old cologne. The one I hadn't worn in weeks. That night, I dreamed of my boardroom. Except everyone was wearing masks. Angela was there. Ellis, the quiet man from the soup line who never spoke. Even the hooded figure from across the street. One by one, they peeled their faces off. And underneath were mine. I woke up gasping. And I realized this wasn't just an experiment anymore. Someone was playing me, and I was no longer in control. I should have known from the moment I found that note. It was a mistake to let it go, to assume it was just a coincidence. But I did. I buried it under the weight of the daily grind, the cold nights, the empty stomach, the people who passed me by as though I was invisible. And yet, despite it all, a seed had been planted, one that couldn't be ignored. Someone was watching me. Someone had been watching me all along. But it wasn't until I met Ellis again that I realized how much danger I was in. I first saw Ellis at the soup kitchen. His hair was matted and his clothes shredded, but his eyes, they were sharp. Too sharp for a man who had lived in the gutter for so long. He spoke little, but when he did, it was with a kind of chilling certainty, as if he already knew what I was thinking before I thought it. "You think you're fooling everyone," he said one evening, his voice low, like it was meant only for me. "But you're not." I stared at him, confused. He smiled faintly, almost like he could see straight through my carefully constructed walls. "The test," he whispered, "it's not about you, it's about them." I didn't understand. Not then. But something in his voice made the hairs on my neck stand up. He wasn't just talking about my experiment. He was talking about something far bigger. That night, I couldn't sleep. The shadows in the alley seemed to press in closer, darker than usual. The hum of traffic seemed distant, muffled, like the world itself was holding its breath. I pulled the note from my shoe again, staring at it until my eyes burned. "You're not the only one pretending." It was the same handwriting as before, and the same smell, my cologne. I went back to the pantry the next day, hoping to talk to Angela, to ask her if she knew anything about the strange occurrences, about the notes. But when I saw her, something in her eyes stopped me. She was different. There was a distance in her gaze, something closed off that hadn't been there before. I watched her talk to the other workers, giving directions, organizing food. But every time our eyes met, she quickly looked away. It wasn't just a coldness. It was a fear. Something was wrong. I had to know. I had to find out who was playing me. So I started watching. Really watching. I paid attention to the little things, Angela's unease, Ellis's cryptic remarks, the strange symbols that kept appearing in my path. I noticed the way certain people avoided looking at me, like I was a shadow that didn't belong. It wasn't just paranoia. It was something much darker. One night, as I lay behind the dumpster, I saw it. A figure moving in the distance. A man in a dark coat. He stood in the shadows, watching me through the alley. I couldn't see his face, but something about him felt wrong. He didn't belong here. Then, as if sensing my gaze, he stepped forward into the light. It was him, the same man I'd seen across the street. The one who had followed me from the beginning. The one who had been watching. My heart raced. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And just as suddenly as he had appeared, he vanished into the dark again. But this time, I followed him. I trailed him through the streets, keeping a safe distance. He led me deep into the city, to a part of town I had never seen before, a place where the lights were dim, and the buildings loomed like silent giants. The streets were empty, except for the occasional flicker of a neon sign. Finally, he stopped. He turned and faced me. His eyes were cold, calculating, and as he spoke, his voice sent a chill down my spine. "You think this is just a game?" he asked, his tone cold and steady. "You're not the only one who's been tested." I didn't know what to say. I was frozen in place, my body numb from both fear and confusion. "You think you're the one who's playing? The one in control?" His lips curled into a twisted smile. "You're not. You never were." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to me, his fingers brushing mine for just a second. I took it, but I didn't open it immediately. "Take a good look," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "because after tonight, there's no going back." I didn't understand what he meant, but I felt the weight of his words in my chest. My heart was pounding, my pulse racing. I stared at the paper in my hand. It was a picture, a photograph of me, but not the way I was now. It was from years ago, a shot from a charity gala I had attended back when I was still Mark Langston. I stared at the picture, feeling the ground shift beneath me. The man's voice cut through the silence once more. "You were never meant to stay hidden, Mark. Your world, it's always been a stage, and you've just walked onto the wrong set." I didn't know what he meant, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer just pretending to be poor. I was trapped in a game I didn't understand. The man turned and began to walk away, leaving me alone in the dark alley with a photo clutched in my hand. His words echoed in my mind, growing louder with each passing second. "Your world, it's always been a stage." I stumbled back to the shelter, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Who were these people? Why had they been watching me? And what did they want from me? I needed answers. I needed to confront Angela, to ask her what she knew about all of this. But when I arrived, she was gone. The pantry was closed. The doors locked. I stood there in the dark, feeling the weight of everything I had done, everything I had learned. The cold of the night seemed to swallow me whole. And then it hit me. Ellis's words. The symbols. The man in the alley. The note in my shoe. I wasn't the one being tested. I was the test. The night was suffocating. I sat on the edge of the sidewalk, clutching the photo in my hand, my mind reeling. What had I gotten myself into? The man in the alley, the symbols, Ellis's cryptic warning. I wasn't just pretending to be poor anymore. I was part of something much larger, something I couldn't understand, and I was starting to realize how deep the hole went. Every step I took, every person I met, had been part of a carefully woven web. But for what purpose? I had been the one trying to observe, to test the world, but now I was the one being tested, and I had no idea who the puppeteer was. By the time I returned to my makeshift bed under the overpass, I was no longer sure if I could trust my own instincts. The world felt like it was turning against me. Every person I passed, every conversation, every moment was starting to blur into one long, eerie scene. I could feel the eyes on me, though no one was visibly watching. It was as if my every move was being calculated, evaluated. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being drawn into a trap, and the walls were closing in. The following morning, I went back to the community pantry, desperate for any lead, any shred of truth. But Angela wasn't there. I asked one of the workers, an older man with a thick beard and hands stained from years of manual labor, where she'd gone. He looked at me like he'd never seen me before, like I was a ghost. "Who?" he asked, his voice rough and distant. "Angela," I pressed. "The woman who runs this place. She was here just last week." The man shook his head. "Ain't nobody by that name works here. You must be confused." Confused? I wasn't confused. I knew Angela. I had talked to her. I had shared food with her. She had helped me when I had nothing. But now, there was no trace of her. Not a single person in the pantry knew who she was. Not even the regulars who had been there longer than I had. It was like she had never existed. I stumbled out of the pantry, a knot forming in my stomach. The ground felt unstable beneath me. A strange coldness settled in my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being erased. One by one, the people who had shown me even the slightest kindness were vanishing. By the time I reached the alley where I had first encountered Ellis, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the street. I wasn't sure why I kept coming back to this place. Maybe it was because Ellis had spoken the truth. Maybe it was because I felt like I needed to find him, needed to hear more of what he knew. But when I arrived, I found something I hadn't expected. Ellis was there, standing at the mouth of the alley, his back to me. He was staring up at something high above, his face lit by the faint glow of a nearby street lamp. He didn't acknowledge me at first, as though he were waiting for something, or someone. I stepped closer, my pulse quickening. Ellis. He didn't turn around, but his lips curved into a thin smile. You're starting to understand, aren't you? I didn't respond. I didn't know how to respond. The words were stuck in my throat. Do you know what this all is? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you know why you're here? I shook my head, my heart pounding in my chest. No, but I need to know. I need to understand why I'm being dragged into this. Ellis finally turned to face me. There was something cold in his eyes, something I hadn't seen before. He wasn't the man I'd first met in the soup kitchen. This man was something different, something dangerous. You're being tested, Mark. Not just by them, by yourself. He took a step closer, his gaze piercing. You think you can hide from who you are, but you can't. You've built your empire on the backs of people like me. People who get nothing while you sit in your tower. This is your test. And you're failing. His words hit me like a slap across the face. I staggered back, my mind spinning. How could he know any of that? How could he know what I had done, what I had built? I didn't respond immediately. I was too stunned by the realization that he was right. I had spent my entire life building my wealth, my power, my success, but I had done it at the cost of others. I had never truly seen the people I had stepped on to get where I was. And now, here I was, pretending to be one of them, but not really. I was still Mark Langston, still the man who thought he could control everything, even the lives of those less fortunate. Why are you doing this? I whispered, my voice shaking. Ellis's smile faded, and he looked away. Because you need to wake up, Mark. You need to see what's been hidden from you all these years. The following days were a blur. Each step I took felt heavier than the last. Each interaction more suffocating. I saw the same symbols again, the same strange notes. Each time, they felt more like a warning, a countdown. But a countdown to what? I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always behind me, watching, waiting. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, questioning every passerby, every stranger, every glance. But no one ever said a word. No one ever looked directly at me. They just moved past, as though I was a shadow. That night, I returned to the alley again. I was losing my grip on everything. My purpose, my identity. I was supposed to be pretending to be poor, but now I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Was I still the billionaire I had been before? Or had I become something else entirely? Someone else? The man in the dark coat was there again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I approached him, my heart pounding in my chest. Who are you? I demanded. What do you want from me? The man didn't answer immediately. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable. You're the test, he finally said, his voice low and steady. And you're failing. The truth hit me like a freight train. All this time, I had been caught in a game far bigger than I could have imagined. The walls had been closing in, but now I understood. The test wasn't about my ability to pretend to be poor. No, this was about who I really was. The man I had hidden from myself, buried beneath layers of wealth and pride. And I had failed. The man in the coat, the one who had been following me, stood silently as I processed his words. He was taller than I had first noticed, with an imposing presence that made the air feel thicker. His gaze was unwavering, like he could see straight through me. You've been living a lie, he said, his voice steady but filled with something darker, something more chilling than I had anticipated. You built your fortune on others' misery, on others' sacrifices. Now, you're going to learn what it feels like to lose it all. I wanted to speak, to shout, to demand answers, but I couldn't find the words. The weight of his accusation crushed me. Was he right? Had I been living a lie all these years? Was this experiment, this test I had set up for myself, meant to teach me a lesson I refused to acknowledge? Who are you? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What do you want from me? The man stepped closer, his eyes cold and unblinking. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn-out notebook. The pages were old and yellowed, and the edges were frayed, as though it had been handled by many hands over many years. This, he said, holding it out to me, is the beginning of your redemption. I hesitated. I had no idea what he meant by that. But something told me that the notebook held answers I couldn't ignore anymore. I took the notebook from him, my hands trembling. The cover was unmarked, but as I flipped it open, I saw that the first page was filled with neatly written notes in black ink. I couldn't make sense of all of it at first, but one word stood out. Tess. The more I read, the more it became clear. This wasn't just a game. This wasn't just some random set of circumstances I had created. It was an experiment, one that had been orchestrated long before I had even set foot on the streets. The test had begun when I decided to pretend to be poor. But what I hadn't realized was that the rules were already in motion before I had even made the choice. I had been a pawn all along, a piece in a much larger scheme, manipulated by forces far more powerful than anything I had ever encountered. You think you're the only one being tested? The man asked, his voice dripping with disdain. You're not. Everyone around you is part of the game. I turned the page in the notebook, my mind reeling. There, in the center of the page, was a diagram, a web, each line connected to another, each name linked to another. I recognized some of the names, Ellis, Angela, even the man who had been watching me in the alley. But there were other names, too. Names I didn't recognize. Names of people who seemed to be just as important in this twisted experiment as I was. It's all connected, the man continued, watching me closely. Every choice you make, every step you take, has been orchestrated. You're not just pretending to be poor, Mark. You're learning what it feels like to be powerless, to be trapped. You're learning to experience the consequences of your actions. I felt a sharp pang in my chest as I read the names on the page. Was this really happening? Was this some kind of sick, twisted joke, or was it real? And what was the point of all this? Why was I being put through this? I closed the notebook and looked up at him. What happens now? I asked, my voice thick with fear and confusion. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he simply turned and began to walk away, his footsteps echoing in the empty alley. Now, he said over his shoulder, now you face the consequences. I stood there for what felt like hours, the notebook heavy in my hands. The cold of the night had seeped into my bones, but it wasn't just the temperature that made me feel numb. It was the overwhelming weight of everything I had learned. The walls were closing in faster than ever before. I had been played, manipulated, and now I was forced to reckon with the damage I had done, not just to others, but to myself. I had thought that I was the one controlling the test, but I had been wrong. All along, I was just a participant in someone else's game. A game that was only now beginning to show its true, horrifying nature. I needed answers. I needed to confront Angela, to find out what role she had played in all this. But when I arrived at the pantry again, the doors were locked, and the place was completely dark. The shelves were bare, and there were no signs of life. It was like it had never existed at all. I stood there, frozen, staring at the empty space. Where had everyone gone? I felt a tap on my shoulder. I spun around, my heart racing. It was Ellis. His eyes were cold, unfeeling. You can't escape this, he said. The test isn't over yet. It never will be. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I was drowning in the realization that this experiment had no end, no resolution. The game was rigged from the start. Ellis took a step back, his gaze unwavering. You have two choices, Mark. You can continue to fight the truth, or you can finally see it for what it is. Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the street. I stood there, alone, the weight of everything crashing down on me. There was no escape, no easy way out. The test was still going. And now, it wasn't just about who I was pretending to be. It was about who I had become. The city felt different now. Where once the streets had been filled with noise, energy, and the hum of a busy metropolis, there was now an eerie stillness in the air. It wasn't just the quiet of an empty street, but a deeper, unsettling silence that seemed to hang over everything. It was as if the world had paused, waiting for something to happen. Something inevitable. Something that could no longer be avoided. I had been walking for hours, my footsteps echoing through the streets, and yet I felt no closer to understanding what this test was truly about. Was I supposed to learn something? Was I supposed to feel something? Because all I felt was confusion, anger, and a deep, knowing emptiness. I had tried to confront Ellis, tried to get answers from the man in the coat, but the more I searched, the more it felt like they were always one step ahead of me. I wasn't controlling anything. Not my own life, not my own choices. I was a puppet, and I was starting to realize that the strings had been pulled long before I had even started this experiment. There was only one place left to go. The alley where it all began, the place where I had first encountered Ellis. It was no longer just a street corner to me. It was a symbol, the epicenter of everything that had spiraled out of control. A place where answers, if they existed, could be found. When I arrived, I was surprised to find that someone was already there. It wasn't Ellis, though. It was a woman, tall, with dark hair, dressed in a simple coat. She was standing at the entrance to the alley, as if she were waiting for me. "Mark," she said when she saw me. Her voice was calm, composed. It felt like she knew me in a way I couldn't quite place. "Who are you?" I demanded, my pulse quickening. I had seen so many faces, so many people in this twisted game. I had no idea who she was, but she felt important. The way she spoke, the way she looked at me, it was as if I had been expected. "I'm someone who's been watching," she replied, "and I think you're finally ready to hear the truth." I wanted to yell at her. I wanted to demand answers. But something in her voice made me pause. There was no anger in her, no malice. Just a calm, almost serene presence that made me feel like this moment had been predestined. "Who's behind this?" I asked. My voice was rough, desperate for any explanation. "Who's controlling this test?" She didn't immediately answer. Instead, she stepped aside and motioned for me to follow her deeper into the alley. The shadows fell heavier now, as if the night had wrapped itself tighter around me. "Follow me," she said simply. I had no choice but to follow. My feet carried me forward, each step filled with a mixture of dread and anticipation. What was this place? What was happening to me? We stopped in front of a rundown building. The windows were boarded up, and the door was locked. But the woman didn't hesitate. She pulled a key from her pocket and unlocked the door, pushing it open with ease. I stepped inside, the darkness enveloping me instantly. The room was cold, unfamiliar, and in the center of the room there was a table. On it lay a single piece of paper. "Read it," she said, her voice almost a whisper. I approached the table cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The paper was old, yellowed with age, and covered with symbols I recognized from the notebook. It was the same web, the same connections. But there was something different now, something that wasn't there before. I began to read aloud, the words heavy in the air. "Mark Langston, the test is complete. You have learned what it means to be powerless. You have learned what it means to be invisible. The choices you make from here on out will determine your fate. Will you choose to repeat the cycle, or will you choose to change?" I paused, my voice faltering. "This doesn't make sense. What does this mean?" The woman looked at me, her gaze piercing. "It means you were never meant to pass. You weren't supposed to win. This was never about you pretending to be poor. It was about you confronting your own complacency, your own ignorance, the way you've treated people all your life without truly seeing them." My mind was reeling, my thoughts racing. The words on the paper felt like a weight on my chest. I had tried to test others, to see if they would recognize me for who I really was, but the truth was I had been the one blind all along. I had failed, not because of the people I had surrounded myself with, but because I had never truly understood the people beneath my gaze. I had seen them as nothing more than tools, stepping stones to my success. But now I saw them. I saw everything. I had lived in a bubble of privilege, where I could ignore the struggles of others, shield myself from their pain. But now, that shield was gone. I could no longer pretend that I didn't know what I had done. I could no longer pretend I hadn't hurt them, hadn't hurt myself. The woman's voice broke through my thoughts. It's up to you, Mark. What you do next will shape who you are from this moment forward. I looked at her, my heart in my throat. The weight of my actions pressed down on me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly seeing the world, and I hated what I saw. The damage I had caused, the lives I had ignored. She stepped back, her expression unreadable. The game's over, Mark. The question is, what will you do with the knowledge you gained? I opened my mouth, but the words stuck in my throat. The silence was deafening. For the first time in a long while, I didn't have an answer. As I left the building, the cold night air wrapped around me, biting at my skin. But it wasn't the cold that made me shiver. It was a realization that I had been part of something much bigger than myself. And now, there was no turning back. I had learned my lesson, and I could only hope that the world would forgive me. But as I walked down the empty streets, I realized something else. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone I had overlooked, everyone I had trampled on in my quest for power. It was about making things right. The test wasn't over, but I would be different.